I was dyslexic. I didn't know at the time. My parents really believed in me and really sought that help. The amount of people that have dyslexia is unbelievable. People categorize it often as a disability, but I think it's the greatest superpower I've ever been given. You know, some of the Branson, you know, so many examples of dyslexic people, because you end up playing to your strength and thinking in slightly different ways because of the dyslexic. People were like, you know, what are you doing? Now we've got $100 million under management.
Welcome to the Bay HQ podcast, where we inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British-aged entrepreneurs. Today we have with us Reece Chowdhry, who's the founder of Concept Ventures, the largest dedicated pre-seed fund in the UK. How are you doing today, Reece?
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So as we just mentioned there, like what Concept Ventures is doing is groundbreaking. But from your background, when you were growing up, did you ever think this is what you'd be doing when you were growing up?
I think everyone has very different paths when they're, you know, a child. And I think my childhood was an interesting one. I, you know, had a troubled childhood in the sense of I had a very loving childhood, but from an academic point of view, I wasn't, top of my class, and I had a lot of difficulties very early on. Like at the age of 5, my teacher at school said to my parents, Reece will probably not pass any GCSEs, and that's because I was dyslexic, and you know, I didn't know at the time, and you know, I think it was down to really my parents who really believed in me and really sought that help and understanding. And if you look at the business world for a second, the amount of people that have dyslexia is unbelievable. People say, people categorize it often as a disability, but I think it's the greatest superpower I've ever been given. You know, some of the Branson, you know, so many examples of dyslexic people, because you end up playing to your strengths. So how did I end up here is probably back to the question. I had always have curiosity for learning, doing things differently and thinking in slightly different ways because of the dyslexia, because you can't often be like, this is a straight line. You have to kind of, you know, narrow. I was the first person typing in school. I was always a big fan of technology because it used to help me like a lot, right? I always was very curious around technology. I was always very curious around investing. And, you know, again, from a very young age, I bought my very, very first share in Apple. I always was very curious at following my passions, and leading to this day. If you fast forward, the two passions I really had growing up was technology and learning about things and exploring new things, and actually investing in things from a very early age. So I think I didn't know what VC was, but you know, this journey has been just a depth of my kind of passion and also strength. I think people don't, you know, always talk about their strengths, and I think if you're not strong at something, I think you end up not being that passionate about it. So I think it's a combination of all those things.
It's just interesting what you said about dyslexia there as well, because one of my close friends yesterday found out they were dyslexic at the age of 30, and they'd always struggled with reading and always struggled with different things. And they just thought that was normal. They had no idea that actually there was something behind it causing that. And it was such a relief to them to actually realize it's not just a problem with them or them not trying hard enough, them being lazy.
Yeah.
But there's actually something behind that. And like I said, they're very creative. Partly because in a way it can, having something like that, it makes you think in different ways. Yeah. And that's such a strength in entrepreneurship. But like when you came out of university, you actually went into the corporate world first, right?
Yeah.
What was the logic behind that? If you knew like you wanted to do entrepreneurship or investing,
yeah,
did you like go down that path because you wanted to learn more and then go into investment, or what happened there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think being around like-minded people is something that, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs talk about. You know, even this podcast is sharing a lot of knowledge from like-minded people. And I think where my thoughts were actually, if you I went to EY, or I was young at the time, and that was a great place to ground my career, because you met fantastically ambitious people who were like very motivated to make meaningful impact in the world, in the business world, and their training was excellent. And I think that, you know, all the people I spoke to found that it was a very good grounding, whatever they went on to in the career. And actually we did a study of unicorn founders in the UK recently internally, and actually you'll be unbelievably surprised the percentage of people that started their career at very, you know, institutions like that, on grad schemes from like Google to EY to, etc. And I think that is not surprising to me in a lot of ways, because I think their selection process, their training, their ambition, the foundational skill set that they provide is really strong. And I think that was my thinking. To be honest with you, I think it wasn't the right place for me in a lot of ways, because it was a big corporation, and I got very, very frustrated very quickly with, things that I felt were very inefficient, and that just demotivated me a lot. But as a culture and a place, they've taught me a lot about what the world is like and how to grow a big business. And yeah, so I think it's a great place to start your career. I probably stayed there too long, if I'm honest.
So you mentioned how you didn't even know what VC was before.
Yeah.
And even just now you mentioned the term unicorn.
Yeah.
And I did this term recently because I did this in one of my stories. Like, do people know what unicorn means?
They don't.
And a lot of people don't, right?
No.
And obviously I can, like, say like $1 billion startup.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes that's one of the tough things, that once you get more into this world, you use terms because they're very common within our bubble, but then other people haven't necessarily heard of them. And it's like, how do we break down some of those barriers? So how did you find out about VC? Like, what got you into that environment?
Yeah, so I think my background was an interesting one. It's not your classic VC background. Your classic VC is someone who probably goes to investment banking, then works for one of these top tier funds like Excel or Index or Sequoia, and then kind of spins out and starts their own VC. Then that's the kind of set path, I would say. And I think with me, it was one of those paths that it was driven by like experience in terms of just building on my passion. So when I left EY, I essentially built 3 startups at the same time. And I basically, again, was working with people that I found very interesting. And I didn't know, again, I was going to go into the VC side, but I thought, these are things I want to work on. They're all software businesses. They interest me. And then, fast forward, we built those companies. One was a disaster very quickly. One sold private equity, and one's kind of still going today. And then I became a very active angel investor, because the reason why I became a very active angel investor is because a lot of people actually started saying, do you want to invest in my company? And that's because, I was younger at the time. I was in my 20s. I, didn't look like a lot of the people that people could relate to that were building companies. So, often, it might be from all types of background. We're like, oh, you've actually done something in the startup world. You're like, operationally, you've got a solid career, and actually you could probably help us in terms of, and that was quite a rare, this was a long time ago now. That was a rare skill set. And so that's how I started investing and building up my angel track record. And then I've got like 80 angel investments now. And the proceeds from the sale of the last company was helped me fund. So, we grew it organically. And then today, we've built a business with Concept. It's, we've just closed our last fund. It's $60 million. It's backed by the British Business Bank, who are like our cornerstone investor, which is the investment bank of the British government. And, from a standing start, all of our team are outsiders in VC, and we have this outsiders mentality from everybody. And I think that really helps us with our investing, building the firm, getting to where we have. And I'm really, really, really proud of what we've done from a complete standing start. What I'm really, really proud of more than anything is what we've created is a new type of concept. Just like our LP base, which is our investors who invest in our fund, 80% of them from ethnic minority, 20% are from women. And like that's creating an asset class that people haven't been exposed to and haven't been able to invest in various different communities. And I think that's one of the things that we really like, the fact that we're doing something very, very different, and we've done something different.
And I think there's some maybe people don't realize is that with the venture capital firms, a lot of the money comes from the LPs, the limited partners, and that's the side that's still very, very white and male, right?
Yeah.
And for you to be able to find that many women and that many people from ethnic minorities to back you, that's really rare. And some people from that world might, like not from this world, might not realize that. And that's something which needs to change over time, right? Because if the people backing the venture capital firms are from only the same background, then it's kind of natural you start seeing that the people they invest in also from that background. And looking at the angel investments, right? So angel investments is kind of an individual investing in different companies from their own bank, right? What was the first one you ever did, and how hard was it to make that first decision? Because I imagine for many people, they might have made a bit of money, but they think, oh, I'll put it in the stock market, I put it in like property or something like that. What made you Obviously, you were from a startup world yourself, but was it scary for you to risk your money like that?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I really had two pots of savings, my career at EY and also some of my Apple shares. If you believe in something, you really, and you know, you're young and you're naive, and you know, now I tell people like don't do what I did at all. Like it was just it was silly, but I think, you know, really startup investing is really about spreading the risk over a number of companies, right? Like, and you know, one of them will return, and that's the maths of the situation. I think that first investment I made, I mean, I made a few at the same time, but one of the first investments I made was into a company called Landlord Invest, which is a fintech peer-to-peer company, which is still going today. And yeah, I think it was one of those investments where, you know, we, looking back on it, we probably did the fundamentals of what's right, team and market and exit. But I think when you look back, you think, oh, that's also like luck as well. Like as well, one of the things great investors in our ecosystem have is very low ego. And if you speak to the great investors, they actually realize like the ego element. By lowering your ego, you have like a beginner's mindset. And I think going back to the point about the child, and just like, because I'm like, I'm like, okay, I actually am not trying to be smart here. And I ask very beginner's mind questions because of dyslexia and because of that, you know, uncovers like first principles of a company. And I think that actually that framework has gone scale. But one of the things I would definitely mention, our whole fund is based on, you know, backing people, because we're at the earliest stage. So for those people who don't know, pre-seed is the first stage, typically the first round of institutional money people take. And what we always base our principles on personality and who they are and where they, you know, what they've done before and like their strengths as a people. Because if you think about it, where we invest, it's not anything to do with, we're investing off pitch decks or plans or, you know, across the whole of UK. And, you know, inherently what people do is they say gut feel investment at the early stage. So they're just like, oh, that person looks like me. That person looks like the person who built, you know, Monzo. Oh, that's a sure thing, right? And actually, it's just your gut feel isn't the right methodology, especially across the whole team, you know. And so I think we've really taken this data-centric approach to understanding who people are and drilling down on that, because I think that's really, really important. And that helps with all the problems with VC about, you know, diversity and bias and, you know, which everyone knows, you know, more money should be going to all of those great areas. So I think that's really important.
It's really interesting because obviously part of what you're doing, which is so different, is that you are investing in those underrepresented founders and people who maybe would get passed over by some of the other venture capital firms. And like you said, you use a data-centric approach. What kind of things are you looking for in those founders? What makes somebody stand out, somebody who you believe in, who's going to potentially go far?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think, you know, to be clear, I think we don't market ourselves as like an impact fund. There's some great funds out there who are like, you know, only investing in ethnic minorities or women or, you know, people from all different backgrounds. I think what we are very, very, and I'm very, very conscious to, that person can come from anywhere. Those skill sets, in terms of not skill sets, that framework of what we think a great founder is, like, you know, some principles about risk taking, vision, leadership, you know, these principles, which we have 6 or 7, which we think are fundamental to building great companies, are like non-negotiable for us, right? And so we don't really care where you've come from or what school you went to, or, you know, if you've demonstrated that, and that can be, doesn't have to be in a previous startup, that could be previous companies or charity work or, you know, extracurricular work. And if you can demonstrate those skills and that framework that we think is great, you know, that's something that we will progress through our process, right? Like, so I think that's really important to note, because I think there is a kind of a culture in VC at the moment of, we are like a women only fund, which is great, and we do need that. But I think what we think is like, let's just level the first step. We think is just like level the playing field. Let's find out who you are as a person. Let's have a human centric approach. And yes, there needs to be more dollars going to all of those causes for sure. And you made the good point about from the top of the food chain to the bottom. And, you know, I think that's really important. We need to do that. We aren't that fund in the sense that we have this like methodology around who you are.
But I think naturally as well, when you're looking at people based on who they are, rather than what they look like or rather than whatever, you naturally will invest in a more diverse pool of people. because you're not just judging them based on like the school they went to or the color of their skin or whatever it is, or like, oh, you both went to this high school, so then we're going to invest in you, that kind of thing with your website as well. So if people go into your website, they're going to see you've got your entire investment philosophy there. You've got a lot of detail about what you're doing as well. And that transparency is missing from a lot of venture capital generally, right? People know that you apply to there or you can send a pitch deck, but they don't necessarily know exactly what they're looking for, or what if they get rejected, they don't know why they're being rejected, and they can't necessarily easily see that. Was that quite important for you to have that public information so people can see exactly what's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think that VCs generally is a black box, particularly who people haven't raised VC or angel money before. And, our whole methodology was to bring this new kind of concept to VC. A lot of founders get ghosted. People don't understand what their terms are. You don't know who the team are. At the end of the day, the quote I always give is like a VC relationship with a founder is longer than the average marriage in this country, right? And people spend 2 weeks often going back and forth and deciding if they want to get into this marriage. It's almost like that Netflix show, Love at First Sight. And I think that what I said to our team, and when we did our rebrand and new page, is that we just want to be as transparent as possible. We put our term sheet on our website. We tell you this is the makeup of our LPs. This is tell you what we look for. And more importantly, more than anything, we tell you about who we are, as people. This is my childhood photo. This is the football team I support. This is the books I like. This is what I do outside of work. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to work with that person. And if you can align and have some common interest apart from work, you're going to have better quality of relationship. When there are difficult conversations, which there have been a lot of times in my career, then you can pick up the phone and have an honest conversation with people. And I think the VC industry generally can be very transactional. And the great VCs understand it's like a really human-centric kind of industry where empathy and connection is actually a superpower, really.
Is there anybody who you've invested in where you just really believed in their story, where maybe other VCs wouldn't have, and who you've invested in, they've gone on to do well, that you'd like to just highlight and give them the spotlight for a moment?
I always like the investments that, everyone kind of passed on and are, really, out the box and completely, different. And I think there's a company that we invested in called Condensed Reality, which was a Bristol-based startup, so outside London. And there's actually a massive problem of like London-centric funding, so that's like another story. And a lot of people passed on it, and this was like a metaverse type company, very, very different, spin out, based in Bristol, 3 founders. And no one really gave them a chance. They thought it was kind of off the wall, and they've has still a long way to go. But I think I was really proud of particularly our team as well, who we really thought about the investment, and we really felt that it was a really strong bet. But so many people passed, like everyone passed, I'm sure, and at the early stage. But then obviously when they've come and done the new funding round, Local Globe, or a very prominent VC, I think the top seed VC in Europe, actually invested in their last round. And it was good validation. Again, it goes back to this thing, there's too much herd mentality with everything, right? Honestly, if I mark the best investments in my portfolio and said these were going to be the best ones when I invested and these are going to be the worst, it would be almost nowhere near right in a lot of that. So I think it's a very humbling industry in so many ways.
Because the interesting thing is obviously on the other side is that you had to get people to believe in what you were doing to give you the money to invest.
Yeah.
And how was that process? Did you find that difficult? How did you get people on board? Because you've got some huge names like the British Business Bank on board as well. What were those conversations like?
It goes down to consistency. Often in business and in life, it's not the fastest person, it's the most consistent person that kind of wins the race. And you look at all those productivity books and all the, 4-hour working week and all ever. And I think generally it really goes down to consistency. And people, when I started Concept, people were like, what are you doing? You're in your 20s and you're going to build a VC fund, right? And you're going to, now we've got $100 million under management. And actually, generally, I spoke to 3 people who I really respect, and they probably gave me, they literally were 1% chance. I was like, I'll take 1%. And
better than zero?
It's better than zero. It is really hard to raise money for a fund. like it's harder, much harder than raising, because I've done on the company side, much harder than raising company fund. They've got to believe in your judgment and your intrinsic kind of philosophy on investing, and like they've got to pay you for that, and that is like a tough thing to do. What we did was just build the firm really slowly. Like, you know, we did a small fund, then we proved it, then we sold a company, and then we, you know, had some good returns, and then we built another fund, and then we scaled it, and some, you know. So I think over the kind of 60 deals that we've done at Concept and 80 deals kind of we've done personally, people start to really believe the story and the messaging, and like they can see your consistency. And it's like, you know, banging on doors. And with the British Business Bank, that was a 3-year process from start to finish when I got introduced to them. And what they found impressive about us is like we kept building, we built the team, we built the funds, we kept on, and we were so consistent about the stage we invested in, what we invested in. And I think they gave us a load of feedback. We came back a year later and said, we've done all that feedback. And they were like, nobody actually comes back and execute. I was like, why wouldn't people do that? And they were like, yeah, but they just don't come back to us. And I was like, okay, like I didn't really realize that people wouldn't do that. So I think it's incredibly hard, but like it's one of those businesses that if you're very consistent, do what you say you're going to do, be right by your founders, and generally try and do something different, which I don't think is that hard in VC because it's a bit of an archaic industry. I think you can move the needle. Phase 1 is complete in my opinion. And now it's, you know, now our ambition is to become, you know, one of the leading pre-seed funds in the world and VC funds in the world, you know. So, you know, obviously we'll always have a focus on the UK because, you know, that's what we believe is the right thing to do. This is, you know, base camp of Everest.
So it's what you mentioned there about consistency. And it's one of the things we're doing here is that we're looking at different ways you can stand out in this market, because obviously there's a lot of podcasts, lots of saturation. Like I can do this twice a week, every week, with big name guests every single time, people who other people look up to. And by doing that, we can just prove we're here to stay. Because a lot of people start up, give up after 3 episodes, 5 episodes. There's a stat that 9% of podcasts don't get past 10 episodes.
Yeah, mine included.
Well, you still got time. You could resurrect it again.
Yeah.
But you mentioned as well about your investment philosophy. Could you tell us a bit more about what that is? Because I'm sure there's some founders now who are listening who are thinking, maybe, could Concept Ventures invest in me? What would they be needed to meet?
First of all, we are investors at the earliest stage. So when you're doing your first round of funding, we are the first people you should come and talk to. I think that's number one. And secondly, I think we have a kind of thematic thesis, which is essentially built on 3 pillars, which is we want to invest in companies that change the way people work, play, and learn. So what does that really mean? That can be anything from, you know, an education tech business to a game studio to a business productivity tool and everything in between. But what we really gets us excited is maybe something that overlaps 2 areas, like a edtech business that maybe helps with, it was a game that's an edtech business, or there's like a tool that you can use at home which helps you learn or play a different way of doing things. So I think we're really focused on those themes. But again, what we've realized as an early stage fund, and again, this is going back to that trying to reduce your ego and principle around being smarter than everybody in the room, which tendencies VCs sometimes have because they are really smart and they've gone to best universities and like they kind of molded in that way, is that we generally think that businesses change 2 or 3 times. There's 2 or 3 great pivots in most great companies. If you look at the history, I mean, Slack is a great example of that. It started off as a games company, right? And so I think what's consistent is the people. So our whole lens is around people. I think the frameworks we have, work, play, learn, is a good way to frame like people sending us stuff, but really at the end of the day, we're a people-centric organization and we have our principles around that. And some of it is a bit of a black box and sense deliberately because we don't tell everybody everything. But I think that everyone knows what great entrepreneurship is and can study that very well.
And because you've done so many investments so far, has there been any hard lessons you've learned where at the beginning, obviously you'd have pivoted your own investment philosophy, right?
Loads of times.
Right? So what kind of pivots have you made there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. At the early stage, I think the number one principle we've learned, and there's loads of studies on that, you need a higher volume approach to win, because the outliers in VC, they had this concept of a power law, which essentially is one company essentially will return everything in your fund and some. And if you look at the, history of venture, there's time and time again from Facebook, etc., where one company is like generationally defining, and for that firm as well, right, on the VC side. And so without the cadence of volume and investing consistently and regularly at the early stage, you cannot achieve that kind of escape velocity in one company. And often it's the non-obvious companies, because if it's obvious, then everyone will be crowding into it. And so that's consistent. So what we've realized, again, is the non-obvious stuff. It's often having our own conviction when others don't, and doing things that are regular in terms of every month we will do a deal, every month we'll do a deal. And I think that puts us in a very, very good fitting. But I think the lessons I've learned really is, always have a beginner's mind, always understand that you've really, really got to get who the person is in front of you more than anything. And I think thirdly, I think one of the things we look back on and looked at our portfolio and saw what's the theme between the companies doing well and not. And I think one thing that the founders particularly were very, very clear on was that they had a very strict, for the next 12 to 18 months after we invested, they were like, these are our key performance indicators. These are the top 3 things that are going to move the needle. And every single month they were consistent on reporting. And even when they weren't wrong, we were like, we've now changed these top 3 things, but they were so consistent. If you looked at the monthly updates people sent us, the consistency of them and their performance is almost like directly correlated. It's like, so that you can read into that what you want, but I think that communication is probably, very, very important between all sides in good and bad situations.
And even going back to your team, because you mentioned your team a few times and how proud you are of them, and also that they don't come from traditional backgrounds.
Yeah.
So how do you, if they don't come from traditional backgrounds, how do you judge who you think is going to be able to tell like what companies to invest in? How do you look at that?
Yeah, I think again, it goes back to our framework, which is like, we're not expecting people to be like, invested in, the next Monzo before they come and work with us. I mean, we have Sequoia, I think I've ruthlessly, everything in life can be ruthlessly stolen, like in some respects, those good things, right? And copying is genius if you do it in the right way. And I think I stole this from Sequoia. Sequoia had this mentality of like getting people in a year early and like then built like growing with the culture of the firm, and they really believe in that. And I think all the people that we have are, one of them, worked at a startup, one started their own startup, one worked in crypto, then did some community building. And, they've all worked with us through 2, 3, 4 years now. And I think the mindset of someone who can work well in VC is a very specific one. And I think when you go through a certain interview process, you can kind of see that in a lot of ways, because how are they approach things in their personal life? What have they done? I think you have to be a real out-the-box thinker, if I'm honest, and you have to be bold, and I think you have to think in a completely different way. So, your classic interview, the style of interview you have is like, I answer a question and you answer back. And like, and then I remember Ollie in my team, who's our principal, he basically came and interviewed with us, and he had wrote down this over the last 4 months. These are like maybe actually a year. He wrote down all the deals he saw on Crunchbase, or why he liked all of them. And he just did that in his spare time. And I'm like, okay, that's like something different. You've shown me you're actually really passionate about getting into this, because the main thing people think when they go into VC is this: they want to be a VC, but they don't actually understand that being a VC is actually, you got to love being a VC. People just love the idea of investing. There's so many other things, from like supporting your portfolio to like actually understanding the industry, to understanding, what other people are doing, to so many, developing yourself. And I think people forget, and I think it's Bill Gurley, who's at Benchmark, who did a podcast, but he was like, actually, when I'm hiring, the number one thing I look for is, does this person actually want to be a career VC? And that's very, very different to being, I want to do some deals. Because all the young people that I meet are like, yeah, I just want to invest in things. And I'm like, yeah, but like, that's like a part of the job. And there's like all these other things that have a list. So when I look at people, I'm like, okay, but are you going to do like the work, the proper work?
What parts of it do you enjoy the most yourself? Because obviously you didn't come from a background in traditional VC. And there must have been some things where obviously there's always the admin that people overlook, right? All the kind of stuff you don't really want to do, but it's necessary for the foundation for the rest of it. What do you find that you enjoy the most on a day-to-day, or like even in the long term? Like, what's the stuff that makes you happy to keep doing what you're doing in the future?
Yeah, I think, look, a career, VC is not a get-rich-quick scheme, right? By any means. There's plenty of other things that you could do to get rich quicker, I would say. But I think what I really, really enjoy is making sure that we're building a firm like that's making a meaningful impact in the companies we invest in. Like, there's millions of people that use the products that we've invested in, or services, service a bit like, the software we use. And I think that for me is like very impactful. It's transformational in a lot of people's lives. And I think, again, we're not an impact VC, but like, I think the learning about new people, building the firm and building that kind of next generation of like investors that will invest, and building that into like a category defining company, and that really interests me. But then more than anything, it's when you meet those founders and you understand why they do what they do. And I think that's a bit of a cliche, but I think you're always learning on the job, which always you find like, what is your why, I suppose, is the question. And I think the why for me is like two things: building the firm, and building, it's a startup in itself, right? Like, and the building the team and like gelling together and making sure that we build the best firm possible is like that. Like, I find really interesting, and like that is just like company building, like at its core. And the second thing is winning together and investing in companies that just have a meaningful impact in whatever they do. It might not be like an impact investment, but like they'll have a meaningful impact into companies or people's lives in some respects. And I think learning about that and something new is really interesting.
Is there any company you've just felt like the impact they've made, it's just blown your mind? So you mentioned one earlier.
Yeah.
But is there any other ones where you could just say, like, just before we move on to quick fire questions, if you want to just give a shout out to some of the companies? Yeah,
I think there's just so many. The one that I think is really, really meaningful in the company. Recently, because I just got off a call with them earlier, is a company called Good Course in our portfolios, and they are a company that provide micro learning. So think of TikTok videos, but for really impactful courses. So they have universities all over the country who send out a message to all of their students when they start Freshers Week and say, hey, this is some sexual harassment training course, 3-click videos, and the retention and the usage of it is phenomenal on that format. And what they're doing is really, really meaningful. And that I don't think they ended up trying to start there, but they were like, we need to make learning more impactful for a younger generation in a easier to digest format. And then they've ended up there, and I think they've done exceptionally well, and that kind of company is just like fantastic. And I've got to say, they do their monthly reports very well.
Yeah, that's the key thing. In listening, do your monthly reports well, you'll become a unicorn, and you will know what that means now if you remember from the beginning. So we're going to move on to quick fire questions now. So first one, and it's always the hardest one for everybody, is who are 3 British Asians you'd like to shout out that people listening right now should be following and learning from?
I think the fun person I have to start off with is definitely my mum. I had to shout out my mum. She's a founder of a life coaching consulting business called Savran, and they help lots of predict all their clients are British Asians. So she has really meaningful impact, particularly healthcare. She's worked with the Met Police, transforming various different organizations. So I think she's, my inspiration in a lot of ways. And obviously from my childhood, she was the one that kind of really believed and went the extra mile to make sure. So number 1 has to be my mum. Number 2, I think Jay Radia, who I think may be coming on the podcast, is, I think he's putting himself out there a little bit more. And I think, he been a great entrepreneur in the UK, and he's kind of a little bit under radar, built 3 companies very successfully. I'm an investor in 2 of his companies, so slightly biased maybe there, but what he's doing with his kind of Happy Millionaire podcast and the message he's trying to do is, very impactful. Third one, I think, is Hussein Kanji. And Hussein was, he's a guy who, for me, I always looked up to, because if you look at the VC industry, there's not many British Asians who built their own funds from scratch, like from zero to, sub, over 50 million pounds, right? Like, and, Hussein's last fund, 200 million, he invested in Deliveroo, Darktrace, but that guy always makes time for you. When I started my career, he sat down with me, had a coffee with me. I was literally like, I didn't know anything really. And he took his time and really, said, this is what went well. This is what we learned, and just ruthless honesty. And you got to follow that guy's Twitter. It is hilarious. He is great on Twitter. So shout out to Hussein's Twitter.
So make sure you give all those people a follow. So 2 more questions. First one is, if people listening right now are looking for help or guidance, what should they reach out to you about?
Anything probably talked on the podcast. I think if you're thinking about starting your own fund, if you're thinking about becoming an angel investor, if you're thinking about founding a company, I've got all the war stories, like from all of those, all the failures, all the wins, all the exits. And I think, really, if there's anything we can do to help at Concept, please look at our website. Our website, like you said, is very transparent. There's a lot of Q&A on there, a lot of great materials about if you're starting a company as well. So do kind of check that out. And, obviously just reach out to us, particularly on LinkedIn. That's an easy way to get in touch. Obviously I would happy to help in any way.
And then on the other side, what could somebody listening right now maybe help you with? What are you looking for help with?
We're always looking for great founders. I think really founders are the lifeblood of our business. So if you are starting a company, please spread the word about Concept in all the communities. Think of us, apply on our website, message us. My email address is on the website, and so you can email me directly. So, we would love that. And obviously, having closed our last fund, we are actively deploying, particularly in UK businesses within those areas of work, play, and learn. So think of us, and we would really appreciate that.
So thank you so much for coming on. Any final words?
Thank you. I really enjoyed it, and looking forward to listening to all your other guests.
Thank you for listening to the Bay HQ podcast today. In our mission to inspire, connect, and guide the next generation of British Asian entrepreneurs, it would mean so much to us if you could subscribe to our channel, leave a review, and share this with your friends.